be back. And it's so weird, I like sleeping in his office. I like staying here at the church. It's just so easy, and the energy here is so beautiful. And just piggybacking a little bit on your story is that, so when I first started to teach at Unity, I wanted everyone to believe what I believe, because it worked. And then over time, because of students like Ken, I realized I couldn't make anybody believe like I believed. And so I was finally able to reach a point where I could say to somebody, I don't care what you believe. And most importantly, I care about you. I don't care what you believe, I care about you. And so that was so freeing, and the wonderful thing about education, I think if we really step into it, it's a co-facilitation. And that's been my process. Students have facilitated my learning, and I hope my teachings and what I say have facilitated other people's learning. So today, I'm going to take you on a little journey. Unity in A Course in Miracles, Understanding Our Common Path to Spiritual Understanding. This is my latest book, which I co-wrote with Rev Paul Hasselbeck. And this is, I'm going to give you a little roadmap today, because this is a little bit of a complex talk. So we're going to take a deep breath. And let's just relax. Now the only thing I would want you to do is understand. I don't care if you believe. Are you with me? Yeah. Yeah. Understanding is all we're after. So I'm going to give you a little background, an overview, Unity's 5 basic principles, some distinctions between the two, their synergies, and just one thing. I'm going to wrap it up with just one thing. You ready for that? Okay, let's start romping. So background. When I came to Unity Village for the first time in 1993, A Course in Miracles was not welcomed on campus. And so when I started using quotes from A Course in Miracles, I got funny stares and looks. And I didn't care. I just kept speaking what I knew was the truth for me. And I knew at a time that Unity had welcomed Course in Miracles prior to that. And I went to the library, I went to the archives to see what was written about it, and I found things entitled Unity Course in Miracles, and I excitedly went into them, I listened to them, and they were so lame. And I couldn't understand why they were so lame. So I started thinking, why isn't there someone who has compared the teachings of Unity and Course in Miracles? And then a few years later, I started to ask, where are today's Unity writers? Because there really weren't any contemporary writers in Unity. And I kept asking those questions, and there kept not being an answer. And then suddenly I realized, I am. If I'm the one wondering, maybe I'm the one that needs to answer the question. And so if there's something you're looking for in your life and wondering where it is, maybe it's yours to do. Maybe that's in your heart. And that's yours to do. And so time went by, and I did start writing. And then this wonderful man, Rev Paul Hasselbeck, came to school, came to the seminary. And he had a passion for both Unity and Course in Miracles. He came to my office, and I shared with him, I said, Bill, I just wish there was something that was written down that compared the teachings of Course in Miracles and Unity. And he said, why don't we do it? And I went, well, duh. And so we started a process that we thought would be a year or two, and it turned out to be an 8-year journey. And so we really took some time to birth this. So I want to start with this quote from Charles Fillmore, because it is so key to Unity. Because in Unity, we do not expect you to check your brain cell at the door and simply swallow what we're saying. And so Fillmore said, we have to develop in ourselves this capacity to know ourselves. That is always the starting point. Know yourself. And I like to say, self-awareness leads to self-knowledge in a vast field of self-acceptance instead of self-condemnation. Fillmore said, another can suggest things, but we have to take the suggestions and apply it to our own understanding, and I would take it for a test drive. So, let's look at some things. So in the big picture, both use Christian terminology. The historical texts, very Christian in nature by the language, and as the same is true of A Course in Miracles. They both use very traditional male-centric language, referring to God as He and Him and Father. They use a dualistic language, and by that I mean is you read things like God and I are one, or we're one with God, or we're one with the oneness. And that with always implies they're more than one, and yet that language is being used to point to a non-dualistic system, that where there is only one power and one presence. And both of them use a very basic and fundamental tool called denials and affirmations, that on the surface are deceptively simple. At depth, they are amazing consciousness conditioners. They condition and change our minds if we use them properly. And so a good place to start is to look at our 5 basic principles. You guys, you've probably heard of them here over and over and over again, but let's review them. God is absolute good, everywhere present. We find that in unity. And of course in Miracles we find God is all in a very literal sense. All being is in Him who is all being. Second principle, human beings, whoops, I am clicking this too fast. There we go. Human beings have a spark of divinity within them, the Christ Spirit within. The very essences of God, and therefore they are inherently good. And since many of you have heard me speak before, I don't think we have a spark of divinity in us. I think we have the entirety of the divine within us. And of course in Miracles we find deep in your mind the Holy Christ in you. The Holy Christ in you is waiting your acknowledgement as you. Third principle, the power of thought. Human beings create their experiences by the activity of their thinking. Everything in the manifest realm has its beginning in thought. Everything in this relative world has its beginning in thought. And of course in Miracles we find whatever thoughts you accept into your mind has reality for you. Have you noticed that? You know? That's the good news and the bad news. It is your acceptance of it that makes it real. All thinking produces form at some level. All thinking produces form at some level. And the very interesting thing about that is that in the time in which both of these were being written, we didn't have the science that showed us that the thoughts we hold produce molecular changes in our body. So there is literally a connection between the molecular structure of our body in some way and the thoughts we hold. Positive thoughts raise and support our immune system. Negative thinking depresses our immune system. Prayer. Prayer is creative thinking that heightens the connection with God and mind, and therefore brings forth wisdom, healing, prosperity, and everything good. And of course, I would say what prayer does is make me aware of the oneness I am. Not the connection, but the oneness I am. And of course, the Miracle says, true prayer must avoid the pitfall of asking to entreat. Ask rather to receive what is already given, to accept what is already there. And then finally, live the truth, action. Unity, knowing and understanding the laws of life, knowing and understanding spiritual truth is not enough. A person must live the truth that he or she knows. We must live it to understand it. And the Course says a theoretical foundation such as the text provide is necessary. It is doing the exercises that will make the goal of the Course possible. It is in the doing of exercises. And the doing of the exercises of the Course is really about denials and affirmations. It's really about changing your thought system. So let's look at some of the distinctions. In Unity, we have a teaching about the ego, and it's called the adverse ego. It's not the entire ego. The adverse ego is when the ego attaches itself to sense consciousness This is known as the adverse ego. It is the adverse ego that causes all the trouble in the world. So there's a part of our personality, our ego, that gets wrapped up in what our senses are telling us. And we believe that is true in the place of our own divinity. In the Course of Miracles, we hear the ego is idolatry, the sign of a limited and separate self, born in a body, doomed to suffer, and to end its life in death. So here is really a major distinction that's being set up. In unity, we're talking about an adverse aspect of the ego, not the entire ego. In the Course in Miracles, the preponderance of what's said is that the ego is bad, and the ego must be somehow eliminated. But this distinction is really pointed out really well in this quote. Charles Fillmore said, the ego is the I, the ego is man, and by reason of his divinity, by the reason of your divinity, he makes and remakes as he wills. Have you noticed that? That you are making and remaking your life on a moment-to-moment basis, and then often blaming somebody else for it. And Fillmore says, in this, his greatest strength and greatest weakness. So this idea that we're making and remaking our lives is so important. It is both our weakness and our strength. He says, the ego of itself is possessed of nothing. It is a mere ignorant child of innocence floating in the mind of being. And here's the kicker, folks. But through the door of its consciousness must pass all the treasures of God. So there's an aspect of your personality, there's an aspect of your ego that I would call the supportive ego. And it's there we find the treasures of God. It's there we find the very divine ideas and laws and principles that we can use to live our lives more productively and to live our lives more happily. Because it is those principles and laws, it is the divine of us that we use to manifest our best life. We find another distinction in the teachings around the body and healing. In A Course in Miracles, God did not make the body because it is destructible and therefore is not of the kingdom. The body is the symbol of what you think you are. It is clearly a separation device and therefore does not exist. In unity, we find the body is the outer expression of consciousness. Now, it would have been good if Fillmore stopped there because we could be calling that consciousness the divine. But then he goes on, and it seems like it's agreeing with the Course in Miracles. The precipitation of the thinking part of man. So that first sentence sets it up to sound like God is not any way involved in creating the physical body, just like the Course in Miracles says. But then he goes on to say, God created the idea of the body and man as a perpetuating, self-renewing organism, which man reconstructs into his personal body. God creates the body idea, or divine idea, and man by his thinking makes it manifest. Okay, so the body, while God is not directly creating and manifesting your body as we were traditionally told in our traditional Christian thought, what God is the very divine idea that somehow, some way, each of us then use to manifest into our bodies. So let's look at the synergy. Oh, let me go back to that actually. I want to say one more thing. So in unity, the reason why we pray the way we do for healing is because God did not directly manifest your body. If God did, it'd be appropriate to pray to God and ask God to fix us. Okay? But since we are part of the equation, we are using the divine idea of body to manifest our bodies, then the process involves us. And so when we pray, it's about aligning ourselves with the divine idea of body in its purity, in its infinite potential to produce body, and then we limit that idea in our own unique ways to manifest our physical bodies. So now let's look at some synergies. So in unity, it's about developing and expressing our Christ potential. Of course, in Miracles, it's undoing the ego's belief system. So let me talk about that a little bit more. So in unity, we find the preponderance of the teaching is how do we use the denials and affirmations? How do we use the 12 powers? How do we use these 12 divine ideas to be this Christ here and now? To be more divine now, to become more enlightened, to spiritually grow. And there's a little bit about undoing the adverse ego, those things that hold us back from being the best we can be. In A Course in Miracles, it's reversed. There is material about this Christ presence, this Christ principle, this divinity that you are, this Son of Godness that you are. However, the preponderance of A Course in Miracles is about undoing the ego and the ego thought system. So we have a really interesting synergy here in that if there's a way in which we can learn from both, we have a system that helps us undo our adverse ego, and we have a system that helps us be the best we can be. And so the two work together, I believe, create a synergy that makes our becoming better and better, to be the best we can be, in a simpler and more direct way. And then we're back to the one thing. The one thing. And it's this one thing that ultimately riveted me first to A Course in Miracles and then to unity. Because nothing else matters if you do this one thing. Nothing else matters. Now listen, before I got to A Course in Miracles and then unity, there was almost no religious system that I didn't study, plus a lot of what we might call woo-woo or fun stuff. Okay? Astrology. I learned how to be an astrologer when there were no computers, okay? I was doing it by hand, okay? I learned how to read tarot cards. I learned about karma. I learned about reincarnation. And ultimately, that underlying thing for me was seeking to find ways in order to express that innate urge in me to be the best I could be. To be that Christ principle. And I found those all complex. And when I found A Course in Miracles and Unity, I found this one thing, just this one thing that made it very simple. Because if you do this one thing, where the stars are make no difference. If you do this one thing, what the tarot cards tell you don't make a difference. If you do this one thing, it nullifies karma. Imagine that. Nullifies karma. If you do this one thing, any soul contract you believe you have with another human being on the planet is now null and void. If you do this one thing. And here's that one thing. Be the best you can be. Be the best Christ you can be. A Course in Miracles says it, everything is either love or a call for love. Now those sound a little different. However, Jesus, the person that we put on a kind of pedestal, the one who demonstrated Christ consciousness the best, said this is what we should do to be the best we can be. He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then I think it's in Matthew. In Matthew we find love your neighbor, love your enemies, and pray for those who prosecute you and persecute you. So you're supposed to love your God. You're supposed to love yourself. You're supposed to love your enemies. I don't know about you, but that's everybody, isn't it? That's everybody. So the key in being the best Christ you can be is to be the love you already are in potential. Unity's teaching that. Course of Miracles is teaching that. And if you're simply being the love that you are and learning to express more and more of that love that you are, none of the other stuff matters. And I don't know about you, I like life to be simple, don't you? Okay? I don't care where the stars are. I don't care what my past life was. I don't care about my soul contract. I don't care about any of that anymore. I care about being the love that I am and caring about you and seeing the love that you are, and you are, and you are, and you are. And doesn't that make life simple? And so in the context of September 11th, and all the stuff that's been happening in the world, and all the, oh my God, what's happening, and the angst, and the anger, and the fear, with all the troubles that we see in the world, I would like to offer you another point of view. Would you like another point of view? Yeah. Okay, so in Unity we have a really fundamental teaching. It's called chemicalization. Have you heard about that? Chemicalization is when an individual is becoming aware of higher spiritual truths and beginning to take them on, then anything unlike it in their consciousness bubbles up into their awareness and causes transitory turmoil. Transitory turmoil, right? Or transitory chaos. In other words, not permanent, right? Okay? And so in a way, that transitory turmoil I'm going through in the moment is not evidence something is going wrong. It's evidence I'm doing the work. You know, a lot of spiritual teachings, the New Age ones in particular, say, if you're meeting resistance, if you're having trouble, you're doing something wrong and it's not yours to do. You've heard that, haven't you? Well, aren't you grateful Jesus didn't know that teaching? Right? Because he met a lot of resistance and a lot of turmoil, and he was eventually killed. Right? So, since there is this thing called chemicalization that's individual, I believe there is cultural chemicalization. And I would say right now, we are going through a worldwide chemicalization process. And it's been going on for a couple decades. In a sense, we could say there is this wave of love moving from the infinite to the finite. And that love is crashing on the shores of our beaches and our consciousness. And as it does so, it's creating a little bit of turmoil. Right? And so what if we saw all this turmoil and all this chaos as evidence that all the work that's been going on since the 80s that I've been involved in was all about peace, all about love, and how do we be it more and more in the world? What if it's working? And all the crap that's happening is evidence of it, and it's evidence that we need to turn up the burner even more. We need to do that one thing more individually and collectively. And so we wash that chaos right out of our hair and move on to a new age of being. Because I believe that over the decades and eons, if we look back over time, there have been these waves of consciousness, pure, undifferentiated consciousness, crashing on the shores of the consciousness of humankind. And each time, we've gotten a little bit better. And isn't that what it's about? And so I ask you to go back to this thought. To know for yourself and to apply your knowing to your own understanding. And whenever someone is loving to you, you give love back. And when in the appearance someone seems to be not loving you, you see that as a call for them to be loved. And so rather they're loving you or persecuting you, it's a love response that's required. Do the one thing, friends. As both A Course in Miracles and Unity teach, be the best you can be the Christ that you are, Be the love that you are. And that takes care of it. And so it is.